'Tis I, your old buddy and pal, King Chuck. Happy weekend before Super Bowl. Not much in the way of sports on TV, tragically and unfortunately. Yes. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to get some chores done today. I'm actually heading towards the grocery store right now. But I think I'll spend a few minutes with you talking about the fact that, well, we're getting some warmer weather finally here in Michigan after spending pretty much the entire month of January sub-zero and below zero temperatures. And then, of course, I started the month with the flu, and yeah, I'm done with this shit, man. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some media news. Big news in Detroit with the newspapers there. The Detroit News and Free Press are now going to be co-owned. The USA Today company, formerly known as Gannett, just finalized their deal to purchase the news from a company called MediaNews Corporation out of Denver, Colorado. So the story goes like this. The new Detroit had always been a strong two-paper town with the news and the Free Press. The news was once owned by the company that the USA Today company was formerly known as Gannett, and the other the Free Press was actually owned by a company called Knight Ridder, not to be confused with David Hasselhoff, of course. Remember that show? Oh man, I actually had a toy car that resembled Kit. I loved that show when I was a kid. I thought it was so cool having a talking car. And you know how Kit had that thing on by the at the front of the car, they had the red light that went right and left. Oh my god, that was so freaking awesome. So I actually had a car, and I dumped a bunch of Cheerios in it because I was a little stupid boy, and I broke the damn thing. Aww. And my parents never bought me another one to teach me a lesson. Yeah, don't break your toys. Yeah, Kit might be the most powerful car of the 1980s, but not that powerful. So what happened was, Knight Ridder owned the Free Press, Gannett owned the news. Gannett bought Knight Ridder many years ago, and they decided to spin off the news because they didn't want to own both papers at the time. They didn't want, consolidation. And so the story was, at the time, the news and the Free Press had a long-standing joint agreement to cooperate with each other. And as a result, the news and the Free Press, they had a Sunday, weekend edition, Sunday edition, which I thought was kind of cool because, when I was a boy, I loved the fact that for $1.50 you had not one, but two sets of comics from both papers. Yeah. And, the Free Press, they had Garfield and Peanuts and Hager the Horrible. Curtis was kind of a cool strip. Yeah, they had a couple of black strips in the Free Press, but the news, they had all the adventure strips like Spider-Man and Maryworth. Anyway, so now USA Today will now own both the news and the Free Press, but they have announced they will both operate separately. We'll see how long that will last because there's been so much consolidation in the paper business. Now, in recent years, the news had not done a Sunday edition. They basically shoehorned everything into the Free Press for their Sunday edition. And not only that, the newspaper I can't believe how effing thin it has gotten. It is so thin. It's like, I like to buy newspapers for my mom. sometimes, because she's got a parrot. And you know what? But of course, newspapers make very good liners for bird cages. Well, the paper is so thin, I'm scared that if my mom's parrot takes a dump, it's going to go through the paper. Kind of like how when I was a kid, you had those little stamps you could put into water and it disintegrates. That's kind of how I view most newsprint these days. Anyway, but there's another consolidation concern that I'm a little bit concerned about myself, and it's up in northern Michigan. So for years I've reported about how the owners of the NBC affiliate, which is 7 and 4, they're owned by a company called Sinclair. Very conservative, far right-wing company. And they operate the ABC affiliate, which is 29 and 8. And the story is Sinclair owns 7 and 4, but 29 and 8 is actually owned by a shadow company, a shell company that's actually owned by the family that started Sinclair. Sinclair is a publicly traded company, but the actual Smith family owns this company called Cunningham Broadcasting. So, in the FCC's eyes, they're two separate companies. Well, same situation with 9 and 10, which is the CBS affiliate. Now, 9 and 10 is actually locally owned by a family called the Iacobellis. They are based out of Cadillac. And the Iacobelli family has owned 9 and 10 now since 1986. This is their 40th year of owning the stations. So what's going on is Fox 32 is actually owned by a company called Cadillac Telecasting. Cadillac Telecasting is actually owned by a man from Phoenix, Arizona, who happens to be a close ally to that family. And the man's name, by the way, is Alex Balea. So the story now is that Pete Iacobelli, who is now the owner of 9 and 10, because his father Mario passed away a few years ago. So the story is he now owns 9 and 10. He's the one responsible for moving the station from Cadillac to Traverse City in a very cramped studio, I will say. Now their anchors have to stand in front of this giant screen, and they have to share it with the weather guy because they don't have a green screen anymore, which is stupid. And it's like, basically it is, in that terminology of that studio, it's like living in one of those tiny houses, where you pull out a bed so the living room turns into a bedroom. Yeah, or going even further back, those old sleeper sofas, those hideaway sofas. My parents had one when I was a kid that turns a sofa into a bed, which is kind of cool. But in the world of television, 9 and 10, they're trying to cut back. And meanwhile, 7 and 4, owned by the almighty Sinclair, they're getting a brand new studio. And that thing, that new studio of theirs has a ton of bells and whistles. They're dumping a lot of money into that station, whereas the Iacobellis, it's like, so this is what's going on with them. According to FCC documents, they will be actually owning 32 outright, because they're going to pay Alex Balea $50,000. And according to documents, Alex's address is the same as 9 and 10's address, which is Cass Street in Traverse City. And I'm like, wow. So I'm thinking to myself, this is, I love it when they say, well, we don't own 32, we just operate it. Well, technically they own it. They're just paying somebody to quote-unquote own it because of FCC rules and regulations. But now, because Trump wants more media consolidation, that's the tragic truth. Donald Trump wants companies to merge and then get down on their knees and kiss their ass. Kiss his ass, I should say. And, of course, that's part of the reason why we're going to talk more later on about the Melania movie. So, anyway, so I'm not for media consolidation, even though earlier we talked about the News and Free Press. The Detroit News has always been a center-right paper, whereas the Free Press is the opposite. And I'm wondering if they're going to start, kind of like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, if they're going to just cooperate on a daily basis. We'll see. By the way, we do have a good follow-up to a Bee-otch of the day that we've been reporting on for years. Some awesome news regarding one of our very close friends and allies, Darren Gibson. One of his enemies, Traci Kornak, is probably going to spend a few minutes in jail. So here's the story. Darren, 10 years ago, there was a radio station here in Grand Rapids called WPRR, 1680 AM. Public reality radio. It was owned by a man named Bob Goodrich. Bob Goodrich owned a ton of movie theaters, and he owned radio stations in Grand Rapids. He was the man who started WSNX here in Grand Rapids, very popular top 40 station. So the story is, long story short, he sold off most of his radio stations except for 1680, which started in the 90s as a urban station. Then it became a Radio Disney outlet. And then in the late 2000s, he turned it into public reality radio because he felt that Grand Rapids was ripe and ready for a leftist talk radio station. So this is what happens. He hires Darren Gibson. Gibson climbs his way up to station manager. He has the popular Southpaws radio program, which I was a huge fan of. I listened every week. But then he also hired a guy by the name of Tyrone Bynum. Tyrone had more radio experience than Darren. Well, actually, Darren worked at Wood TV 8 a long time ago. But, it's like he has a very lengthy resume. He worked at Wood TV 8, but he also worked as a strip club DJ. And, And Darren even did a podcast on life as a strip club DJ, seeing all the stuff that goes on at the local strip joint. But anyway, so the story with Darren was that, I told you this story before. In 2016, Darren announced that he was angry at the Democratic Party for what they did to Bernie Sanders. He knew that Bernie was going to get screwed because he was too progressive. And, the more centralist, milquetoast Democrats, they were really pushing for Hillary Clinton. And they did it through super delegates and threats. And, of course, we all knew what happened. Donald Trump became president because of all this. Because even though, Hillary won by about 5 million votes, the electoral college process was very fucked up in this situation. Because, anyway, so the rest of the story was, Tyrone had several behind the closed door meetings. Traci Kornak, she was the treasurer of the Kent County Democratic Party. They were all together to get Darren fired from WPRR, and they succeeded. and Darren was fired. All of his associates were fired. Darren produced a few other shows for WPRR, and everyone knew WPRR was toast as a result. And we all knew here, as I've mentioned multiple times, Darren got fucked big time. But, as I've said multiple times before, John Lennon was only half right. Karma's gonna get you, but it's not always instant. So, a couple of years after he got fired from WPRR, Darren obviously was very happy when Bob Goodrich had to declare bankruptcy. His side of the story was that he was investing in putting in new seats in all of his theaters. I know up in Cadillac, he decided to consolidate one of the screens at his 5-screen theater there to create one giant screen that he said was supposed to go head-to-head against IMAX. And yeah. And so anyway, long story short, Bob blamed the movie business for not making enough money for him to pay his bills, so he owed the studios and vendors a shit ton of money. And as a result, he had to declare bankruptcy, and he lost his theater chain. And of course, guess what? When it happened, when COVID hit, and all the theaters had to close. So Bob was unable to get his head out of his ass. And for collateral, he ended up having to sell WPRR to Darren. Not to Darren Gibson, but to Tyrone. And Tyrone, of course, turned WPRR from a very successful progressive talk station to a shitty R&B station who's called 102.5 The Ride. And boy howdy, I am so happy I am broadcasting to you in my vehicle, because I'm going to play you what is currently airing on AM 1680. Static, and guess what's on the FM? Ay vey. Turn that shit off. Turn that shit off, man.
Fire.
Oh my God. Tyrone fucked around and found out. This is really, come on, man. Under federal law, by the way, 102.5 has to be off the air. Seriously, because it's only a translator station. And the reason why is because that's how the law works. 1680 is off the air, so 102.5 has to be off the air too. But nope, Tyrone is fucking around and finding out. And of course, what he did was he decided to... So this is what's going on with Tyrone. So this is the story with Tyrone. He's already been fined by the FCC once because he did not take care of the emergency alert system. And now 1680 is off the air most of the time. And I think it's because Tyrone really doesn't have the money to operate, a 10,000 watt AM station with no listeners. And not only that, a lot of times I listen to the sponsors of WPRR, I wouldn't even call it WPRR anymore. On paper, it's still WPRR. It's 102.5 The Drive, or The Ride, or whatever the fuck it's called. And it's like all the sponsors they have are crap. It's mostly, slum businesses up and down Division Avenue. You got this, Kaufman's Furniture, that's in that plaza that's at 28th and Eastern. I'm going to tell you, folks, 28th and Eastern is a shithole. And I'll tell you what happened. It's like, true story, a couple of years ago, I had an issue with my car, and I had to go to Tuffy to get it fixed. And because it was on my warranty. And what happened was I went to the Tuffy, and they were closed, so I had to do the drop a key thing. And as I was filling out the form, guy comes to me and begs me for $20. He was saying some shit like I was staying at a motel, and he was wearing a Beltline bar shirt because he was, his story was, he claimed that he worked at the Beltline bar. They were paying him shit wages. And it's like, you can't trust a beggar. I know it's not nice to talk shit about them, but it's true. And not only that, because it was, 28th and Eastern, it's close to my work, I had to get food for my dog. And there's a chow hound in that plaza. And it's like I've been confronted by many beggars there. And they've even told me they're trying their best to stop it. And it's like, you're in a bad part of town if the beggars come to you for money and they tell you the same story the last beggar told you. They're not a crackhead. And it's like, you can't trust anybody. I'm sorry. It's like, there's that thing in your heart that says, go and help these people. But at the same time, you don't trust, you never trust anybody with money. And you don't want to lie to them because, you might have a few bucks in your pocket. But anyway, that's the type of business that advertises on Tyrone Station. And, it's like it breaks my heart that I look at the Grand Rapids radio dial. 3 companies control 90% of the stations in town, and the rest of the stations are owned by Jesus companies and, and you look at the local owners, and they all suck. Especially Tyrone. And anyway, I should tell you this. So one of the people who was a part, that treasurer, the Democratic Party, I should tell you this. Traci Kornak, apparently, so this is what's going on. It turns out that she was abusing so this is what happened. She was embezzling money from a vulnerable adult. And now she, this woman has since passed away, but they found out that, she was, she's going to be arraigned on February 17th. It looks like she could be in jail for like 20 years. Yeah, it says here, the House Oversight Committee is focused on shedding light on Kornak's alleged embezzlement, alleging it totaled more than $400,000 and continued after Bird's death. Wow. So there you go. All I can say, folks, is, we need to hold both parties accountable. I don't give a fuck. If you take money, there's good Republicans and there's bad Republicans. Well, there's not many good Republicans, but still. Yeah, but, sadly, there's a lot of Democrats who are total assholes, too. And Kornak was one of them. She bullied the progressives, like Darren Gibson. And Darren, he came from a union family. He stood for union values. He stood up, he's had health issues over the years and has fought for universal health care. But guess what? People like Hillary Clinton, they're Dinos. Democrats in name only. And that's what they want. They will say, we're going to help America get better. And they end up lying. because they accept bribes from PACs and big corporations, you name it. And as long as the shit hits the fan, as long as they get their money and you don't get shit, that's how life works. And that's how life is working for Amazon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this shitty ass film, Melania. Nobody's going out to see it, folks. Melania, it's official, is a box office dud. So the story is that Amazon paid the Trump family $40 million for the rights of this film to release it. And they have paid a lot more money, too, in promoting the film. And unfortunately, it is official. It is a bomb. So anyway, the story is, according to boxofficemojo.com, hang on. So we got Friday's numbers, and the number one film on Friday was a film called Iron Lung. And I did some research on Iron Lung. It's based off a video game. The film was directed by and starred a guy named Mark Fishbach, who goes by the name Marky Plier. So the story is, Iron Lung was released independently with virtually no budget, $3 million, and has now grossed over $10 million. Number two, by the way, number two at the box office so far is Send Help. And that film on Friday grossed $7.2 million. And Send Help, by the way, got great reviews from critics. So this is the story. So Melania is third place right now with $2.9 million. And so far, according to RottenTomatoes.com, it is a total dud and a half. So I'm recording this just before noon on Sunday. So 10% on the tomato meter. And so far, the only positive reviews that I saw so far were, get this, one of the positive, I only saw two positive reviews. One was from the London Evening Standard, which is a right-leaning paper, and free, by the way, which shows how pathetic things are. But here's the thing. The other positive review that I saw was from the Epoch Times. Very far right-wing paper, news site, that is basically, which I believe is actually owned by the Chinese. I don't remember who owns it, but it's not. There are a bunch of people not on our side. So, the sad truth is Jeff Bezos is trying, he is sucking up to Trump. And that's what he did. He paid the Trumps $40 million for this movie because he wants to be on their good side. And in the meantime, they're laying off thousands of workers, like 20,000 people they've laid off. And, a lot of it due to AI as well. And it's like deep down inside, and not only that, they have Melania popcorn buckets. And at movie theaters, it's like, if I was seen with a Melania popcorn bucket, I would throw. It's like, this is part of the reason why when I go to a movie, most of the time I don't get refreshments. I eat before the film. Or maybe I can steal, take a snack in with me, even though they don't necessarily like that. So let me explain this to you. Donald Trump, the sad truth is, so the film is released through MGM, which Amazon owns, and it breaks my heart that MGM is a shadow of what it used to be. They were the largest movie studio in the early days of Hollywood, back in the golden age, and they kicked ass and take names for 30 years. It was the studio behind The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, the Tom and Jerry shorts, many high-budget musicals. And then what happened was, a lot of shit happened. And, part of it was because MGM was a greedy company. So what happened was most of the studios in Hollywood owned movie theaters, and they determined what theaters could show a film. And a lot, back in olden days, sometimes, if you lived in a small rural town, you probably wouldn't get a new movie until upwards to a year, depending on how well it played in the major cities. So what happened was Hollywood said, you can't do that anymore. And so that's exactly what happened. Hollywood now had to, basically it was to protect the small guy, the small mom and pop theaters in small towns. And so this is what happened. So they break up the studio system, and as a result, MGM and their parent company, Loews, Loews, not the hardware store chain, by the way. So they break up. They have a corporate breakup, and MGM, they were still producing decent films, a lot of high-budget films like Ben-Hur, but everything started to really fall apart in the 60s. And, and another problem, too, was that, over the years, private equity firms would buy the studio, and other investors like Kirk Kerkorian as well. Kirk Kerkorian was credited for being the guy who made MGM not just a movie studio, but also a chain of casinos and resorts. He slapped the MGM name on them. And, Ted Turner bought the studio at one point, 1986. He bought the studio, but he ran out of money, so he kept the film library, but sold the studio back to Kerkorian and his other investors in 86. So MGM no longer had a soul, really. And not only that, they had to sell off the studio. And Sony owns it now, which I think is kind of funny, because considering that way back in the 1930s, Sony's company, Columbia Pictures, they were the trash, they were the bottom of the heap in Hollywood. And usually, if a star player at MGM or Paramount or whatever, if they were on the shit list at that studio for whatever reason, they had to do a movie at Columbia Pictures. And because Columbia was the low-class studio. As a matter of fact, Columbia was so bad, the story was one of the companies that became Columbia Pictures, it was a company called CBC Pictures. It was owned by three guys, two brothers named Cohn and a guy named Brandt. Cohn, Brandt, Cohn. And the joke was, it actually stood for corned beef and cabbage. So, anyway, the sad truth was, in the last several years, more private equity firms owned MGM, and, it was actually owned by a firm called MGM Holdings, and it was like almost every film that got released was a flop. It was like they were the total opposite of what they were, back in the 30s and 40s. And now, guess who owns it? Amazon and Jeff Bezos. And now he's perverting that company even more with that fucking Melania film. And some people are calling this film, and what's even worse is the fact that, the film was released too late. Because last week, they announced the Oscars, but they also announced the Razzie Awards. And guess what? I would imagine that the Razzie organization will still remember this film a year from now. So, needless to say, the Melania film has been the victim of parody. On Facebook, I saw a political cartoon from Clay Bennett showing ICE agents taking their victims to the Melania film. Another is a site devoted to remixing the old Nancy comic strip from Ernie Bushmiller. One strip showed Nancy talking to Sluggo about a movie called, I think it was called Amen Abba, or whatever the fuck it was, and it was a movie about a Christian woman who falls in love with a Muslim man. It was critically acclaimed. So Nancy had an idea to have the theater to herself, so she changed the letters of the marquee to read Melania, and it showed a whole bunch of people just running out of the theater, even jumping out of the windows. Oh my God, it was too funny. But somebody remixed that strip even more. So in this time it ends with Nancy saying, in all fairness, there was another movie that won an Oscar about a sex worker who moves to New York and falls in love with another man who turns out to be a MAGA idiot. And guess what film it was, folks? It was Midnight Cowboy. 1969. And of course, Jon Voight was one of the stars of the film. And we all knew what happened to him. Yeah. Of course, he's the father of Angelina Jolie. And Angelina wants nothing to do with him. I mean, hell, that's the reason why she doesn't use Angelina Jolie Voight. Yeah. But you see, folks, this is what happens in Hollywood. They want you. They're saying, Amazon doesn't give a shit about its customers. They think that people are going to rush to the theater and watch this shit. They're not. I mean, why should people go and bow to a man who is ruining the economy, who is fucking up healthcare, who is, whose tariffs have caused everything to be expensive? Why? It's not worth it unless, of course, you're a Fox News moron and you want to see this shit. I mean, I've even passed through Fox News and they air commercials for this shitty film. And all I can say is, I'm glad it's bombing. I'm glad that it's costing, Amazon a shit ton of money. I wouldn't give my left nut to see it. Why should I? And, Melania Trump is the worst first lady ever. I mean, she is a woman who with no fucking soul whatsoever. And her husband, more Epstein files were released, and it's getting more and more sick, folks. We need, and more celebrities are, Bill Gates, I guess, tried to pay Epstein for some girls, and Jay-Z, allegedly, he had to erase his entire social media because his name's all over the files now. The truth's coming out, folks, and it's going to hurt Trump. It's going to hurt everybody. And, He's no hero, folks. He's not a role model for our children. You know, the only two presidents in my lifetime who would be great role models for children, in my opinion, are both Obama and Biden. They're both good people. Obama overcame diversity to become president. And even Biden had some tragedies in his lifetime. Losing his wife and daughter in a car accident. And, losing his son to cancer. But, and I know he ain't perfect, especially with Hunter. But, look at all the people that Trump has pardoned. Rapists and abusers and all people with a lot of money. This is a government that's not transparent, and it's all about how much money can you make so you don't have to be in jail. Trump is a convicted felon, folks. He is not a good man of character, but he's in the White House again, all because people didn't want a black woman as our president. Folks, this is why I keep saying this. We need more true progressives in the world of the Democratic Party. And I'm seeing more and more of it. We need the more progressive, the better. Because I'm tired of this vote blue no matter who shit. That's why I didn't vote in 2000. Because Al Gore and Joe Lieberman were not going to improve healthcare. They were not going to make shit less expensive. No, they were on the mission to kill rock and roll and Howard Stern. Because that's what Al Gore's wife did back in the 80s with the PMRC. So, needless to say, capitalism is working. We got a movie that's number one at the box office, and it's a film that wasn't even backed by a major studio. $3 million budget, and it's a hit. Melania, $70 million. $5 million, and by the end of this weekend, it's supposed to make $5 or $6 million. The people have spoken. We're tired of Trump. And if you went and saw this film, shame on you. Yeah, I see that there was a photo online of what was it? Moms for Liberty or some shit like that. They all went and saw this movie. It's like, come on, you deserve a lot better. Moviegoers deserve better, and I know this is a tough time for Hollywood and the movie business. And I mean, the Saga after strike hurt everything, and so did and the fact that Hollywood's just not making good movies. They're all going straight to streaming. And going back to the mom and pop theater owners, they're scared. I know of a theater in Bad Axe, Michigan. They're having to go through crowdfunding to stay open. Now, I can go on and on about all this, but I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump is learning his lesson. People are sick, and people deserve much, much better. Okay, ladies and gents, I gotta get going. I'm freezing my ass off in my vehicle. Good day and good luck, and most importantly of all, don't hassle the Hoff. Bye now.